Imagine a sweltering summer morning in 1892, the kind where the heat clings to your skin like a bad omen, and the air in a quiet Massachusetts town hangs heavy with unspoken secrets. In a modest house on 2nd Street in Fall River, a young woman named Lizzie Borden steps into the sitting room, her face pale, her voice trembling as she calls out to the maid. What she claims to discover next will send shockwaves through the nation. Her father, Andrew Borden, one of the wealthiest men in town, sprawled lifeless on the sofa, his head brutally hacked apart by what appears to be an axe. Blood pools around him, soaking the upholstery, the walls spattered in a grotesque pattern that tells of unimaginable violence. But that's not all. Upstairs, in a guest bedroom, lies her stepmother, Abby Borden, her body crumpled on the floor, her skull cleaved open with even more ferocious blows. The weapon? Nowhere to be found. The killer? Vanished without a trace. Or had they? This is the infamous Lizzie Borden case, a tale of family discord, hidden motives, and a trial that captivated America. Did Lizzie really take that axe and give her parents those fatal whacks? Or was there something darker lurking in the shadows of that fateful day? Stick around as we unravel one of the most enduring mysteries in true crime history, right here on the Crime O'Clock. Fall River, Massachusetts, in the late 19th century, was a bustling mill town, its skyline dotted with the smokestacks of textile factories that churned out cotton goods for a growing nation. The Industrial Revolution had transformed this once sleepy port into a hub of wealth and opportunity, but beneath the prosperity simmered class tensions, economic disparities, and the rigid social norms of Victorian America. It was a place where fortunes were made in the mills, but also where families like the Bordens navigated the complexities of inheritance, resentment, and repressed emotions. Andrew Jackson Borden, born in 1822, was the epitome of the self-made man. Descended from early settlers, he started his career as an undertaker, crafting coffins and handling the dead, a morbid trade that perhaps foreshadowed the grim fate awaiting him. He amassed a fortune through savvy investments in real estate, banking, and those very mills that defined Fall River. By 1892, his net worth hovered around $300,000, a staggering sum equivalent to millions today. Yet, despite his riches, Andrew was notoriously frugal, some might say miserly. He refused modern conveniences like indoor plumbing or electricity for his home at 92 2nd Street, insisting on kerosene lamps and outhouses, even as his peers embraced progress. His family life was equally austere. Andrew's first wife, Sarah Morse Borden, died in 1863, leaving him with two daughters, Emma, the elder, and Lizzie Andrew Borden, born in 1860. 3 years later, he remarried Abby Durfee Gray, a woman from a respectable but less affluent family. To the outside world, the Bordens presented a picture of stability, attending the Central Congregational Church and participating in community affairs. But cracks ran deep within the household. Lizzie, a spirited and intelligent woman, chafed under her father's tight control of the purse strings. She longed for the finer things, travel, culture, perhaps even independence, but Andrew's parsimony kept her tethered. Resentment toward her stepmother simmered. Lizzie and Emma referred to Abby not as mother, but by her first name, viewing her as an interloper who might dilute their inheritance. Whispers in town spoke of arguments over property deeds, with Andrew gifting real estate to Abby's relatives, fueling the sisters' fears that their father's wealth would slip away. The house itself became a symbol of this discord. The 2nd Street residence was no grand mansion. It was a narrow, 2.5-story Greek Revival structure, divided awkwardly with locked doors separating family quarters. Upstairs, Lizzie and Emma occupied one side, while Andrew and Abby had the other, connected only by a back staircase. This physical separation mirrored the emotional chasm. Meals were tense affairs, often eaten in silence, and the atmosphere grew thicker in the days leading up to August 4th, 1892. The heat wave that gripped New England that summer only amplified the unease. Reports of food poisoning plagued the family, perhaps from spoiled mutton or contaminated milk, leaving everyone ill and irritable. Lizzie, in particular, seemed on edge, visiting a local drugstore the day before to purchase prussic acid, claiming it was for cleaning sealskins. The pharmacist refused, citing the poison's lethality. Was this a failed attempt at something sinister, or an innocent request? The stage was set for tragedy, and as the clock ticked toward that fateful morning, no one could have predicted the horror about to unfold. On August 4th, the day began like any other in the Borden household, but an undercurrent of peculiarity lingered. Andrew left early for his business rounds downtown, while Abby busied herself with housework. Bridget Sullivan, the family's Irish maid known as Maggie to the sisters, was washing windows despite feeling unwell from the previous night's illness. Lizzie, dressed in a simple blue cotton dress, claimed to be ironing handkerchiefs in the kitchen. Emma was away visiting friends in Fairhaven, leaving Lizzie as the only Borden daughter at home. Uncle John Morse, Andrew's brother-in-law from his first marriage, had stayed overnight in the guest room but departed early after breakfast. By 9 a.m., Abby was upstairs, dusting or changing linens in the guest bedroom. That's when the first blow struck, literally. Sometime between 9 and 10:30 a.m., Abby was attacked from behind, her assailant wielding a hatchet or axe with ruthless precision. 19 blows rained down, shattering her skull and leaving her face down on the floor, blood seeping into the carpet. Andrew returned around 10:45 a.m., fatigued from the heat. He settled on the sitting room sofa for a nap, his coat folded under his head like a pillow. Lizzie later claimed she was in the barn loft, eating pears and searching for fishing sinkers, a curious alibi given the stifling temperatures. Bridget, exhausted, had gone upstairs to rest. Then, around 11 a.m., the second murder occurred. Andrew was struck 10 or 11 times, his face nearly unrecognizable, one eye split in half, the wounds so fresh that blood still flowed when discovered. The killer had struck again, in broad daylight, with the house occupied. How could this happen without a sound? No screams, no struggle, just silence broken by Lizzie's cry to Bridget. "Maggie, come down. Father's dead." Somebody came in and killed him. The discovery sent Bridget rushing downstairs, her heart pounding as she beheld the carnage. Lizzie instructed her to fetch Dr. Seabury Bowen from across the street, then neighbor Adelaide Churchill. Soon, the house swarmed with police, doctors, and curious onlookers. The bodies lay where they fell, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the oppressive August humidity. Initial examinations revealed the savagery. Abby's murder predated Andrew's by at least an hour, her blood congealed while his was fresh. No forced entry, no theft. Andrew's watch and money remained in his pockets. The only potential weapon? A hatchet found in the basement, its blade suspiciously clean but with a fresh break, as if recently handled. As word spread through Fall River, horror turned to suspicion. Lizzie's demeanor raised eyebrows. She appeared calm, almost detached, changing her dress shortly after the discovery. When asked about her stepmother, she claimed Abby had received a note summoning her out, a note that was never found. Inconsistencies piled up. Her alibi shifted, and witnesses recalled her burning a stained dress days later, claiming it was ruined by paint. The town, already buzzing with rumors of family feuds, pointed fingers at the unmarried 32-year-old daughter who stood to inherit a fortune. Was this a crime of passion, greed, or something more twisted? The Borden family, on the surface, seemed to embody the Victorian ideal, a prosperous patriarch, a dutiful wife, and two daughters raised in the strict moral framework of 19th century New England. But beneath this polished facade, the household at 92 2nd Street was a pressure cooker of unspoken grievances and fractured bonds. To understand the bloodshed that erupted on August 4th, 1892, we must peel back the layers of the Borden family's past, where secrets festered like wounds left untreated. Andrew Borden's rise to wealth was a tale of grit and calculation, but it came at a cost. His frugality bordered on obsession, casting a shadow over his daughters' lives. Lizzie, in particular, felt the weight of his control, her dreams of freedom stifled by a father who hoarded his fortune while denying his family the comforts it could buy. The question lingers. Did this suffocating dynamic push someone to the edge of madness, or was there another force at play in Fall River? Andrew Borden's early years were humble. Born to a family of modest means, he learned the value of a dollar young, working as a carpenter before entering the grim trade of undertaking. By his 30s, he had pivoted to finance, leveraging his sharp mind to invest in real estate, and serve on the boards of local banks and mills. His wealth grew steadily, but so did his reputation for being tight-fisted. Neighbors whispered of his penny-pinching ways, how he'd haggle over the smallest transactions, how he refused to install modern plumbing despite his riches. The Second Street house, purchased in 1872, was a stark reflection of this mindset. Cramped and outdated, it stood in contrast to the grand homes of Fall River's elite. For Lizzie and Emma, it was a daily reminder of their father's refusal to elevate their social standing, even as their peers enjoyed gas lighting and running water. Lizzie, born in 1860, was a complex figure. Intelligent and strong-willed, she was active in her church, teaching Sunday school, and participating in charitable organizations like the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Yet, she felt trapped. At 32, she was considered a spinster by Victorian standards, her prospects for marriage dim in a town where her father's wealth made her both desirable and untouchable. Emma, 10 years her senior, was quieter, more reserved, but shared Lizzie's frustration with their father's iron grip. The sisters' relationship with their stepmother, Abby, was another source of tension. Abby, who married Andrew in 1865, was a stout, unassuming woman, devoted to her husband but distant from his daughters. Lizzie and Emma saw her as an outsider, a threat to their inheritance. When Andrew transferred a small property, a half-interest in a house, to Abby's sister in 1887, it sparked a bitter dispute. The sisters demanded and received a rental property of their own, but the gesture did little to quell their resentment. This family friction wasn't just financial. The Bordens lived in a house divided, both literally and figuratively. The layout of the Second Street home was peculiar, with locked doors and separate staircases creating a physical barrier between Andrew and Abby's quarters and those of the sisters. Meals were often silent, the clink of cutlery louder than conversation. Lizzie rarely spoke to Abby, addressing her formally or avoiding her altogether. Neighbors later recounted overhearing heated arguments, particularly in the months leading up to the murders. One incident involved a break-in at the Borden home in 1891, where Andrew's desk was rifled through, and small items, including Abby's jewelry, went missing. Andrew suspected someone close, perhaps even Lizzie, but the matter was hushed up, adding to the household's unease. The summer of 1892 brought these tensions to a boiling point. A heat wave blanketed Fall River, and the Borden family fell ill, possibly from food poisoning. Abby, Andrew, and Bridget Sullivan, the maid, suffered bouts of vomiting, which Abby attributed to spoiled food. Lizzie, too, complained of sickness but seemed less affected. On August 3rd, the day before the murders, Lizzie visited a drugstore, attempting to buy prussic acid, a deadly poison, claiming it was for cleaning furs. The pharmacist's refusal may have been a stroke of fate, but it raised questions later. Was she planning something, or was it a coincidence? That same day, she confided in a friend, Alice Russell, about her fears, saying, "I feel as if something is hanging over me, and I cannot throw it off." She spoke of enemies her father had made in business, hinting at danger. Was this a premonition, or something more calculated? John Morse, Andrew's brother-in-law from his first marriage, added another layer of intrigue. He arrived unexpectedly on August 3rd, staying overnight in the guest room where Abby would later be found dead. Morse was a gruff, practical man, involved in Andrew's business dealings, and his presence stirred speculation. Had he come to discuss Andrew's will or property transfers? Lizzie later claimed she barely interacted with him, but his timing was uncanny. The night before the murders, the household was restless. Bridget overheard raised voices, though she couldn't discern the words. By morning, the stage was set for catastrophe. The Bordens' past reveals a family bound by wealth, but divided by mistrust. Andrew's frugality and Abby's presence created a rift that grew wider with each passing year. Lizzie, caught between duty and desire, stood at the heart of this storm. Did her resentment curdle into something deadly, or was she merely a bystander in a tragedy orchestrated by someone else? The answers lie in the blood-soaked events of the next day, where the quiet of a summer morning was shattered forever. If you're fascinated by cases like this, make sure to hit subscribe and join us here at the Crime O'Clock, where every case is a ticking mystery waiting to be solved. The air in Fall River on August 3rd, 1892, was thick with humidity and foreboding, as if the town itself sensed the storm about to break. Inside the Borden home on 2nd Street, tensions had reached a fever pitch. The family had been sick for days, vomiting, feverish, blaming bad mutton or sour milk. Andrew Borden, the patriarch, had been locking horns with his daughters over property and inheritance, his frugality a constant source of friction. Lizzie, his younger daughter, was restless, her movements sharp and her words to friends cryptic, hinting at a looming dread. Abby, her stepmother, moved through the house with her usual quiet diligence, unaware that her final hours were ticking away. John Morse, the enigmatic uncle, had arrived unexpectedly, his presence stirring the already troubled waters. By nightfall, the house was a tinderbox of resentment, ready to ignite. What happened in those final hours before the murders? And what drove someone, perhaps someone within these very walls, to pick up an axe and unleash a fury that would echo through history? The day before the murders was a study in unease. Andrew, a man who valued control above all, had spent the morning in his office downtown, managing his vast financial empire. He was a figure both respected and feared in Fall River, his business dealings sharp and sometimes ruthless. Some whispered he'd made enemies, creditors, rivals, or tenants wronged by his unforgiving nature. Yet, the real storm brewed at home. Lizzie, at 32, was a woman of contradictions, devout yet defiant, charitable yet consumed by a sense of entrapment. She confided in her friend Alice Russell that day, her voice low, her words heavy. "I feel depressed, as if a heavy weight was on me." She spoke of her father's enemies, of a vague threat hanging over the family. Was she sensing a real danger, or planting the seeds of a narrative to come? Her attempt to buy prussic acid, a poison so potent a single drop could kill, had been thwarted by a wary pharmacist. The rejection left her visibly frustrated, but she returned home, her intentions unclear. Inside the 2nd Street house, the atmosphere was stifling. The family's illness lingered, with Abby insisting the mutton broth served for days was to blame. Bridget Sullivan, the maid, scrubbed floors and windows despite her own nausea, her loyalty to the Bordens unwavering. John Morse, a weathered man with a farmer's bluntness, spent the evening discussing business with Andrew, their voices carrying through the thin walls. Lizzie kept to herself, her movements deliberate, her thoughts unreadable. She later claimed to have spent the evening in her room, reading or sewing, but the locked doors and separate staircases of the house made it impossible to confirm who was where. The layout was a labyrinth of privacy. Andrew and Abby's bedroom accessible only through the back stairs, Lizzie and Emma's rooms a world apart. This isolation fueled suspicion later. How could two brutal murders occur without anyone hearing a sound? By evening, the household settled into an uneasy quiet. Andrew and Abby retired early, still weak from illness. Bridget, exhausted, climbed to her attic room. Lizzie stayed downstairs, perhaps pacing, perhaps planning. John Morse slept in the guest room, oblivious to the horror that would soon unfold there. Neighbors later reported hearing raised voices from the Borden home that night, though no one could pinpoint the source. Was it Andrew arguing with Morse over business? Lizzie venting her frustrations? Or something more sinister brewing in the silence? The family's dysfunction was no secret in Fall River. The 1887 property dispute, when Andrew gifted a house to Abby's sister, had left a scar. Lizzie and Emma had demanded equal treatment, securing a rental property, but the wound of betrayal lingered. Abby, ever the outsider, bore the brunt of their resentment. The heat didn't help. August in New England was relentless, the air heavy with moisture and the buzz of flies. The Borden home, lacking modern ventilation, felt like a pressure cooker. Lizzie's behavior grew odder as the day wore on. She visited a neighbor, Mrs. Churchill, but said little of substance, her eyes distant. To another friend, she mentioned a trip to Europe she longed to take, a dream her father's tight grip made impossible. Money was the root of much of their discord. Andrew's fortune, worth millions in today's dollars, was a prize dangling just out of reach. His will, if it existed, was a closely guarded secret, but Lizzie and Emma feared he might favor Abby or her relatives. The sisters stood to inherit everything or nothing, depending on his whims. Then there was the 1891 break-in. Someone had entered the Borden home, rifled through Andrew's desk, and taken small items, including Abby's jewelry. Andrew suspected someone close, possibly Lizzie herself, but the matter was dropped, swept under the rug like so many family secrets. The incident left a lingering distrust, a sense that even the walls of 92 2nd Street held betrayals. By August 3rd, the house was a powder keg, a miserly father, a resentful daughter, a stepmother caught in the crossfire, and an uncle whose visit seemed too perfectly timed. Did Lizzie's resentment curdle into something deadly, or was she merely a bystander in a tragedy orchestrated by someone else? The truth lies in the blood-soaked hours to come, where the ticking clock of fate would strike midnight. The sun rose over Fall River on August 4th, 1892, casting a harsh light on a day that would become infamous. The Borden household stirred early, the oppressive heat already seeping through the walls of 92 2nd Street. Andrew Borden, still pale from days of illness, dressed in his usual dark suit, and left for his morning rounds downtown, his footsteps heavy with routine. Abby, his wife, bustled about the house, her apron tied tightly as she prepared to clean the guest room where John Morse had slept. Bridget Sullivan, the maid, dragged herself through chores, her stomach still churning from the family's shared sickness. Lizzie Borden, the youngest daughter, moved quietly, her blue cotton dress catching the morning light as she claimed to be ironing handkerchiefs in the kitchen. The house was a maze of locked doors and silent grudges, but nothing could have prepared it for the violence about to erupt. Between 9 and 11 a.m., in the span of a single morning, 2 lives would be extinguished with a brutality that defied comprehension. This was the day the axe fell, and the Borden name became synonymous with murder. The timeline began innocently enough. Around 8:30 a.m., John Morse left the house to visit a relative, his departure noted by neighbors but unremarkable at the time. Andrew followed soon after, locking the front door behind him, a habit born of his cautious nature. Abby, alone upstairs, began tidying the guest room, perhaps smoothing the sheets or dusting the furniture. Bridget, tasked with washing the windows, moved between the interior and exterior of the house, her bucket sloshing as she worked. Lizzie's whereabouts during this window are murky. She later claimed to have been in the kitchen or dining room, ironing or sewing, but her story wavered under scrutiny. The house's layout, with its separate staircases and locked rooms, made it possible for someone to move unseen, unheard. Sometime between 9 and 10:30 a.m., the first act of horror unfolded. Abby, standing in the guest room, was attacked from behind. The assailant, wielding a hatchet or axe, struck with savage force, 19 blows to her head and neck, each one splitting bone and flesh. She collapsed face down, blood pooling beneath her, the room transformed into a slaughterhouse. The precision of the attack was chilling. The blows were delivered with such ferocity that Abby's skull was shattered, her brain exposed. The killer struck from an angle that suggested familiarity with the room's layout, landing each hit with deliberate aim. No screams were heard, no struggle detected. The house remained eerily silent. Bridget, working downstairs or outside, noticed nothing unusual. Lizzie, if her account is to be believed, was preoccupied with her chores. But the timeline raises questions. Abby's body, when later examined, showed signs of coagulation, suggesting she died at least an hour before Andrew. This gap is critical. How could a killer linger in the house, weapon in hand, without detection? And where was Lizzie during this time? Andrew returned home around 10:45 a.m., his face etched with fatigue. He fumbled with his key at the front door, only to find it jammed. Bridget, answering his knock, struggled to unlock it, later recalling a faint laugh from the stairs. Lizzie, she assumed, though Lizzie denied it. Andrew, unaware of his wife's fate upstairs, settled in the sitting room. He removed his coat, folded it under his head, and lay on the sofa for a nap. The house was quiet, save for the hum of summer insects and Bridget's movements as she finished her chores. Lizzie claimed she left for the barn loft around this time, seeking fishing sinkers or eating pears in the stifling heat. A curious choice for a woman who'd been ill. Bridget, feeling unwell, went to her attic room to rest at around 11 a.m. Then, in a matter of minutes, the second murder struck. Andrew Borden was attacked as he slept, the assailant standing over him with the same weapon used on Abby. 10 or 11 blows rained down, each one tearing through his face and skull. His left eye was split in half, his nose severed, his features rendered unrecognizable. The blood was still fresh, dripping onto the floor when the crime was discovered. The ferocity was staggering, each strike delivered with a force that spoke of rage or desperation. Yet, like Abby's murder, it was silent. No one heard a cry, no one saw a stranger flee. The killer had struck in broad daylight, in a house with 2 other people present, and vanished without a trace. At approximately 11:15 a.m., Lizzie's voice broke the silence. "Maggie, come down," she called to Bridget, using the maid's nickname. "Father's dead. Somebody came in and killed him." Bridget rushed downstairs, her heart pounding, to find Andrew's mangled body on the sofa. Lizzie sent her to fetch Dr. Seabury Bowen from across the street, then neighbor Adelaide Churchill. When asked about Abby, Lizzie claimed her stepmother had received a note summoning her out, a note no one ever found. Within minutes, the house was a hive of activity, with neighbors, police, and doctors flooding in. Abby's body was discovered shortly after, upstairs, her blood already darkening on the floor. The scene was chaos, blood spattered on walls, furniture overturned, and the air thick with the stench of death. Yet, no weapon was immediately found, and no signs of forced entry pointed to an outsider. Lizzie's demeanor was unsettling. She appeared calm, almost detached, answering questions with a cool precision that struck some as unnatural. She changed her dress shortly after the discovery, a detail that later fueled suspicion. Her story about the barn loft didn't add up. The loft was swelteringly unbearable, and no pairs were found. The locked doors, the silent killings, the missing weapon, it all pointed to someone familiar with the house. As the police began their grim work, the town buzzed with a single question. Could Lizzie Borden, the church-going daughter, have committed such an atrocity? The blood on the walls demanded answers, and the clock was ticking. The Borden house on 2nd Street transformed from a quiet home into a macabre tableau in mere minutes. Its walls now witnesses to a double murder that defied reason. Andrew Borden lay butchered on the sitting room sofa, his face a ruin of blood and bone. Upstairs, Abby Borden's body sprawled across the guest room floor, her skull shattered by 19 savage blows. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood, mingling with the oppressive August heat. Fall River police arrived swiftly, their boots heavy on the creaking floorboards, as neighbors crowded the yard, whispering in horror. No forced entry marred the locked doors, no valuables were missing. Andrew's watch and money remained in his pockets. A hatchet, its blade suspiciously clean but freshly broken, lay in the basement. The scene was a puzzle of contradictions, and at its center stood Lizzie Borden, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the carnage. What clues did this blood-stained house hold, and could they point to the killer hiding in plain sight? The initial examination of the crime scene was grim. Dr. Seabury Bowen, the family physician, arrived first, his face paling as he confirmed Andrew's death. The wounds were fresh, the blood still glistening, suggesting the attack occurred around 11 a.m. upstairs. Abby's body told a different story. Her blood had begun to congeal, her body cooler, indicating she'd been killed at least an hour earlier, likely between 9 and 10:30 a.m. The gap in time was perplexing. How could 2 murders, so brutal and so close, occur without a sound? The house's layout offered a partial explanation. Thick walls, locked doors, and separate staircases created pockets of isolation. Abby's attack in the guest room, at the far end of the house, could have gone unnoticed by Bridget, who was washing windows outside or in the kitchen. Andrew's murder in the sitting room, while Bridget rested in the attic and Lizzie claimed to be in the barn, was equally silent. The killer had moved with chilling precision. The wounds themselves were telling. Abby's 19 blows were delivered with a heavy, sharp weapon, likely a hatchet or axe, most landing on the back of her head as she faced away, possibly bending over to make the bed. The force suggested a strong assailant, driven by rage or determination. Andrew's 10 or 11 blows were even more vicious, targeting his face directly, as if the killer wanted to obliterate his identity. The weapon, though missing, left its mark, deep, clean cuts consistent with a hatchet's edge. Police scoured the house for it, finding a hatchet in the basement with a broken handle and a curiously clean blade. Tests later showed no blood, but its fresh break raised suspicions. Had it been cleaned or swapped? Other potential weapons, like a claw-headed hatchet, were dismissed. They didn't match the wound's profile. Physical evidence was sparse but damning. Blood spattered the sitting room walls, some drops reaching the ceiling, indicating the ferocity of Andrew's attack. In the guest room, blood pooled under Abby's body, with smaller splatters on the bed and walls. Yet, no bloody footprints or drag marks suggested the killer's path. The absence of theft was striking. Andrew's money clip, containing cash, was untouched, as was his gold watch. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was personal. The locked front door, which Andrew struggled to open upon returning, and the lack of broken windows pointed to an inside job. The house's internal locks, separating family quarters, meant only someone familiar with its quirks could navigate it so stealthily. Lizzie's behavior drew immediate scrutiny. When police arrived, she sat in the kitchen, composed, answering questions with measured responses. She claimed to have been in the barn loft, eating pears and looking for fishing sinkers, when her father was killed. Yet, the loft was stifling, over 100 degrees in the August heat, and no pear cores were found. Her claim that Abby received a note summoning her out was equally suspect. No such note surfaced, and no one saw Abby leave. Neighbors, like Adelaide Churchill, noted Lizzie's odd calm, her eyes dry despite the horror. Then there was the dress. Shortly after the discovery, Lizzie changed from her blue cotton dress into a pink one, a move that raised eyebrows. Days later, she was seen burning a dress in the kitchen stove, claiming it was stained with paint. Witnesses, including Alice Russell, swore it resembled the blue dress she wore that morning. Was it innocent, or an attempt to destroy evidence? Other clues muddied the waters. Bridget Sullivan, the maid, provided little clarity. She'd been outside or in the kitchen during Abby's murder and upstairs resting during Andrew's. She heard no screams, no footsteps, only Lizzie's call to come down. John Morse, who'd left early, had an airtight alibi, confirmed by relatives he visited. Yet, his presence the night before fueled speculation. Had he stirred some family dispute? The food poisoning episode lingered in investigators' minds. Abby's fear of deliberate poisoning, voiced days earlier, seemed prophetic, especially after Lizzie's attempt to buy prussic acid. No poison was found in the victims' autopsies, but the incident cast a shadow over Lizzie's intentions. The crime scene yielded no clear answers, only questions. How could a killer strike twice in a busy house without leaving a trace? Why was the weapon missing, yet a suspicious hatchet lay in plain sight? And why did Lizzie's story shift, first in the barn, then in the house, then uncertain? The police, led by Marshal John Fleet, began to focus on her. The lack of an outsider's presence, the locked doors, and her inconsistent alibis made her the prime suspect. As officers combed the house, measuring bloodstains and mapping the layout, Fall River buzzed with gossip. The Bordens' wealth, their fractured family, and Lizzie's reserved nature fueled wild theories. Was this a daughter's revenge, or had someone else slipped through the cracks of that claustrophobic house? If you're fascinated by cases like this, make sure to hit subscribe and join us here at the Crime O'Clock, where every case is a ticking mystery waiting to be solved. The Borden house, now a crime scene, pulsed with the chaos of discovery as Fall River police and curious neighbors swarmed its bloodstained rooms. The bodies of Andrew and Abby Borden lay where they fell, their wounds a brutal testament to the killer's rage. Lizzie Borden, the only family member present, stood at the heart of the storm, her calm exterior and shifting stories drawing suspicion. By noon on August 4th, 1892, the investigation was in full swing, with officers combing the house for clues and questioning the sole survivor in the home. The town was alight with rumors. Lizzie, the church-going daughter, a murderer? Or was there another figure lurking in the shadows of 92, 2nd Street? As police began to unravel the timeline and interrogate those closest to the crime, every word, every gesture, became a piece of a puzzle that refused to fit. The clock was ticking, and the truth seemed just out of reach. The initial police response was frantic but methodical. Marshal John Fleet, a seasoned officer, took charge, directing his men to secure the house and catalog evidence. The scene was gruesome. Andrew's body on the sitting room sofa, his face obliterated by 10 or 11 hatchet blows. Abby upstairs, her skull shattered by 19 strikes. Dr. William Dolan, the medical examiner, arrived to perform preliminary autopsies on site, confirming the time gap between deaths. Abby's blood was congealed, her body cooling, while Andrew's wounds still oozed. This suggested Abby was killed first, between 9 and 10:30 a.m., and Andrew around 11 a.m. The precision of the attacks, no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle, pointed to a killer who struck swiftly, perhaps catching both victims off guard. But how could such violence unfold in a house with 2 other people present, without a single cry? Lizzie's interrogation began almost immediately. Sitting in the kitchen, she faced Fleet and other officers, her voice steady but her story inconsistent. She claimed to have been in the barn loft during Andrew's murder, eating pears and looking for fishing sinkers, a claim met with skepticism due to the loft's unbearable heat. When asked about Abby, she repeated the story of a note summoning her stepmother out, yet no witness corroborated this, and the note never surfaced. Her timeline for the morning was vague, ironing handkerchiefs, sewing in the dining room, or perhaps upstairs. Officers noted her lack of tears, her almost clinical responses. "I am simply in a dazed condition," she said, but her composure felt rehearsed to some. When asked if she'd seen anyone suspicious, she mentioned a strange man who'd argued with her father days earlier, but offered no details. Was she deflecting or genuinely unaware? Bridget Sullivan, the maid, was questioned next. Exhausted and shaken, she recounted her morning, washing windows outside and in, feeling ill from the family's shared sickness, and resting in her attic room when Lizzie called her down around 11:15 a.m. She'd heard nothing unusual, no screams, no footsteps, despite being in the house during both murders. Her loyalty to the Bordens was clear, but her account raised questions. How could she miss the sound of Abby's attack while working downstairs? Her movements aligned with Lizzie's story in part. She confirmed Lizzie was in the kitchen earlier, but gaps remained. Bridget's attic room was far from the guest room, but the sitting room was closer. The silence of the crimes was deafening. John Morse, Andrew's brother-in-law, was tracked down at a relative's home. His alibi was solid. He'd left the house at 8:30 a.m., visited a niece, and was nowhere near 2nd Street during the murders. Yet, his presence the night before, discussing business with Andrew, fueled speculation. Had their talk touched on sensitive matters, perhaps a will or property transfer, that sparked a deadly reaction? Morse denied any conflict, describing Andrew as his usual stern self. Neighbors, like Adelaide Churchill, offered little clarity. Churchill saw Andrew return home around 10:45 a.m. and heard Lizzie's cry for help, but noticed no strangers lurking. Another neighbor recalled seeing Lizzie in the yard earlier, but the accounts were vague, the timeline hazy. The physical evidence was scrutinized closely. The hatchet in the basement, with its clean blade and broken handle, was a focal point. No blood was found on it, but its fresh break suggested tampering. Police searched for bloodstains on clothing, walls, or floors, but found only the spatter near the bodies. Lizzie's blue dress, worn that morning, became a point of contention. Her claim of changing due to a stain seemed plausible, but the later burning of a dress, witnessed by Alice Russell, raised alarms. It was covered in paint, Lizzie insisted, but Russell's testimony suggested otherwise. The locked doors of the house were another enigma. The front door was triple locked, the side door bolted, and no windows were broken. The killer likely knew the house's quirks, moving through its maze-like layout with ease. As the day wore on, police grew frustrated. No clear motive emerged. Greed, revenge, or madness all seemed possible, but nothing concrete pointed to an outsider. Andrew's business enemies were investigated, but none had been near the house. The food poisoning episode, coupled with Lizzie's attempt to buy prussic acid, hinted at premeditation, but autopsies showed no poison in the victim's systems. By evening, the inquest was planned, and Lizzie was asked to remain in the house under watch. Her behavior, calm one moment, evasive the next, tightened the noose of suspicion. Fall River whispered her name, the weight of her family's wealth and dysfunction pressing down. Was she a grieving daughter, or a killer hiding behind a composed facade? The investigation was only beginning, but the town had already made up its mind. The investigation into the Borden murders tightened its grip on Fall River, transforming the quiet town into a cauldron of suspicion and intrigue. By the afternoon of August 4th, 1892, the police had cordoned off the blood-soaked house at 92 2nd Street, their questions growing sharper as Lizzie Borden's story unraveled. The locked doors, the missing weapon, and the eerie silence of two brutal killings pointed to an inside job, and Lizzie, the only family member present, was under a microscope. Her calm demeanor and vague answers only deepened the mystery. As officers dug deeper, combing through witness statements and physical evidence, the case took on a life of its own, fueled by a town hungry for answers and a press eager to spin a sensational tale. Was Lizzie a cunning killer or a scapegoat for a crime no one could fully explain? The clock was ticking, and the truth seemed to slip further away with every passing hour. The formal inquest began on August 9th, 5 days after the murders, held in the Fall River courthouse before a grim-faced coroner and a panel of local officials. Lizzie was the star witness, her testimony a high-stakes performance under oath. She recounted her morning, ironing in the kitchen, visiting the barn loft, discovering her father's body. But her story faltered. She couldn't pinpoint her exact movements during Abby's murder, claiming to be downstairs or in her room. The barn alibi crumbled. Officers testified the loft was too hot and dusty for anyone to linger, and no paracords were found. Her claim about Abby's note was equally flimsy. No one, not even Bridget, had seen such a note, and Abby's body upstairs contradicted the story entirely. Lizzie's responses grew muddled, her memory foggy, especially when pressed about the hour between 9 and 10:30 a.m. when Abby was killed. "I don't know where I was," she admitted, her voice flat, a stark contrast to the grief one might expect. Medical evidence added layers to the case. Dr. William Dolan's autopsies, conducted with stomachs removed and sent for chemical analysis, ruled out poisoning, dispelling Abby's earlier fears. The hatchet wounds were precise, delivered by a heavy, sharp blade, likely a hatchet or small axe, wielded with force. Abby's 19 blows suggested overkill, a personal vendetta, while Andrew's 10 or 11 were equally ferocious, aimed at his face as if to erase him. The time gap between deaths was confirmed. Abby died first, her blood clotted, while Andrew's was fresh. This meant the killer had lingered in the house, possibly for over an hour, without detection. The absence of defensive wounds implied surprise attacks, but the silence baffled investigators. The house's thick walls and isolated rooms helped. But could a stranger have navigated it so flawlessly? Police turned their attention to the hatchet found in the basement. Its clean blade was suspicious, but the broken handle suggested tampering. Chemical tests found no blood, yet its discovery in plain sight felt too convenient. Other potential weapons, a claw-headed hatchet, a crowbar, were examined but dismissed. Their shapes didn't match the wounds. The dress Lizzie wore that morning became a focal point. Alice Russell's testimony about the dress-burning incident was damning. On August 7th, Lizzie had burned a blue dress in the kitchen stove, claiming it was stained with paint. Russell, uneasy, noted it resembled the dress Lizzie wore on the murder day. Police searched for bloodstains on other clothing but found none, a fact that both helped and hurt Lizzie. Her clean appearance suggested innocence, yet the burned dress hinted at guilt. Witnesses offered little clarity. Bridget Sullivan stuck to her story. She was outside or downstairs during Abby's murder, resting in the attic during Andrew's. She heard no noises, saw no strangers. John Morse's alibi held firm, corroborated by relatives. Neighbors reported no suspicious figures near the house, though one claimed to have seen a man loitering days earlier, a lead that fizzled out. Andrew's business dealings were scrutinized. His ruthless reputation had earned enemies, but none were linked to the crime scene. The locked doors were a persistent puzzle. The front door was triple locked, the side door bolted, and no windows were broken. Only someone with intimate knowledge of the house could have moved so freely, striking twice without leaving a trace. The press descended on Fall River, turning the case into a national spectacle. Headlines screamed of the Borden horror, painting Lizzie as both a tragic daughter and a potential monster. Her attempt to buy prussic acid days before was leaked, fueling theories of premeditation, though no poison was used. The family's dysfunction, Andrew's frugality, the sisters' resentment of Abby, the 1887 property dispute, was dissected in print, casting Lizzie as a woman driven by greed or rage. Yet, no direct evidence tied her to the murders. No blood was found on her. No witnesses saw her with a weapon. The case rested on circumstance, her presence, her inconsistent alibis, her burned dress. On August 11th, Lizzie was arrested for murder, her composure cracking as she was led to the county jail. The town was divided. Some saw her as a victim of circumstance, others as a cold-blooded killer. The investigation revealed a family fractured by money and mistrust, but no smoking gun. Was Lizzie's calm a mask for guilt or shock at her loss? Did an outsider slip through the locked doors, or was the killer someone who knew every creak of the floorboards? The answers lay in the trial to come, where a nation would watch a woman's fate unfold. The arrest of Lizzie Borden on August 11th, 1892, sent shockwaves through Fall River, igniting a firestorm of public fascination that would make her name infamous. The once quiet daughter of a wealthy man now stood accused of hacking her father and stepmother to death in their own home. The evidence was circumstantial: locked doors, a burned dress, inconsistent alibis, but it was enough to haul her before a grand jury and, by December, secure an indictment for double murder. As the trial loomed in June 1893, the nation turned its eyes to New Bedford, Massachusetts, where the courtroom would become a stage for one of the most sensational legal battles of the century. Could a refined, church-going woman commit such a heinous act, or was she a scapegoat for a town desperate for answers? The gavel was about to fall, and with it, the truth, or a version of it, would be tested. The trial began on June 5, 1893, in the New Bedford Superior Court, presided over by 3 judges, including Chief Justice Albert Mason. The prosecution, led by District Attorney William Moody, painted Lizzie as a calculating killer driven by greed and resentment. Their case leaned heavily on circumstance. Lizzie's presence in the house during both murders, her vague timeline, the burned dress, and her attempt to buy prussic acid days before. The defense, headed by George Robinson, a former governor and skilled attorney, argued that no direct evidence linked Lizzie to the crimes. No blood was found on her, no weapon definitively tied to her hand. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation as reporters scribbled furiously, their stories feeding a public ravenous for every detail. The prosecution opened with a chilling reconstruction of August 4th. They described Abby Borden's murder in the guest room, struck 19 times while tidying, and Andrew's slaughter on the sitting room sofa, his face obliterated by 11 blows. The timeline was their cornerstone. Abby died between 9 and 10:30 a.m., Andrew around 11 a.m., with Lizzie admittedly in the house. Her barn loft alibi was ridiculed. Officers testified the loft was too hot and dusty for anyone to linger, and no paracords were found. The mysterious note Lizzie claimed Abby received was dismissed as a fabrication, as no witness or evidence supported it. The burned dress was a focal point. Alice Russell, a family friend, testified that she saw Lizzie burn a blue dress days after the murders, claiming it was stained with paint. The prosecution suggested it was blood-stained evidence, destroyed to hide her guilt. Medical testimony was gruesome but pivotal. Dr. William Dolan detailed the autopsies, describing the hatchet wound's depth and precision, suggesting a strong, determined killer. The hatchet found in the basement, with its clean blade and broken handle, was presented as the likely weapon, though no blood was detected. The defense countered with experts who argued the blade didn't match the wounds perfectly, sowing doubt. The time gap between deaths was another hurdle. How could Lizzie, or anyone, kill Abby, wait over an hour, then kill Andrew without detection? The prosecution argued the house's layout, with its locked doors and isolated rooms, allowed her to move unseen. Bridget Sullivan's testimony supported this indirectly. She heard nothing while washing windows or resting, confirming the house's eerie silence. The defense leaned on Lizzie's character. She was a respectable woman, active in her church, with no history of violence. Witnesses, including her pastor and friends, vouched for her gentle nature. Robinson hammered the lack of physical evidence. No blood on Lizzie's clothes, no fingerprints, a nascent science then, no witness to her wielding a weapon. He painted the prosecution's case as a web of assumptions, built on Fall River's gossip and prejudice against an unmarried woman defying Victorian norms. The prussic acid incident was downplayed as a misunderstanding, with no poison found in the victims. The defense also called John Morse, whose alibi held, and neighbors who saw no strangers near the house, suggesting the police had rushed to judgment. The trial's most dramatic moment came with Lizzie herself. She didn't testify. Her inquest statements, deemed inadmissible due to her being medicated with morphine, were never heard by the jury. Instead, her presence, dressed in black, her face pale but composed, spoke volumes. The jury, all men, seemed swayed by her demeanor, a stark contrast to the monstrous image the prosecution painted. The press, meanwhile, was relentless, with papers like the Boston Globe splashing headlines of Lizzie's guilt or innocent daughter. The trial became a cultural phenomenon, exposing tensions over class, gender, and justice in Victorian America. After 2 weeks, closing arguments sealed the case. Moody urged the jury to see Lizzie's motive, inheritance and freedom from her father's control, and her opportunity, alone in the house. Robinson countered with an impassioned plea. To find her guilty, you must believe she is a fiend. On June 20th, after just 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned, not guilty. The courtroom erupted, some cheering, others stunned. Lizzie walked free, but the verdict did little to quiet the questions. Had justice been served, or had a killer slipped through the cracks of a system swayed by her status and gender? If you're fascinated by cases like this, make sure to hit subscribe and join us here at the Crime O'Clock, where every case is a ticking mystery waiting to be solved. The courtroom in New Bedford fell silent as the jury delivered their verdict on June 20th, 1893. Lizzie Borden was not guilty. The words echoed through the packed room, met with gasps, cheers, and murmurs of disbelief. A woman accused of hacking her father and stepmother to death walked free, her composure unbroken, her fate sealed by a jury swayed by her status and the prosecution's lack of hard evidence. But freedom came at a cost. Fall River, once her home, turned its back on her. The whispers that had fueled her trial grew louder, branding her a pariah in the town she could not escape. The Borden murders left scars on the family, the community, and the nation's imagination. What became of Lizzie after the gavel fell? And how did the shadow of that August day shape her life and legacy? The clock was still ticking, and the mystery was far from over. Lizzie returned to Fall River, but the town was no longer hers. The not guilty verdict didn't erase suspicion, it deepened it. Neighbors who once nodded politely now crossed the street to avoid her. The Central Congregational Church, where she'd taught Sunday school, quietly distanced itself. Friends like Alice Russell, whose testimony about the burned dress had nearly damned her, drifted away. Lizzie and her sister Emma inherited Andrew's fortune, roughly $300,000, equivalent to millions today, but wealth couldn't buy acceptance. The sisters moved out of the cramped, blood-stained house on 2nd Street, purchasing a grand mansion on French Street in Fall River's affluent Hill District. They named it Maplecroft, a symbol of their newfound freedom, complete with modern plumbing, electricity, and sprawling rooms, a stark contrast to their father's frugality. Maplecroft was Lizzie's attempt to reinvent herself. She began calling herself Lizbeth, shedding the name tied to infamy. She furnished the mansion with elegance, hosting small gatherings and indulging her love for theater and travel. But the town's cold shoulder was unrelenting. Shopkeepers whispered as she passed, and newspapers kept her story alive, dubbing her the axe murderess in sensational headlines. Emma, always the quieter sister, stood by Lizzie at first, but cracks soon appeared. In 1905, after a decade at Maplecroft, Emma abruptly left, moving to New Hampshire and cutting contact. The reason remains murky. Some say Emma grew weary of the stigma. Others hint at a falling out over Lizzie's lavish spending or a rumored romantic liaison with a younger woman, actress Nance O'Neill. Whatever the cause, the sisters never reconciled, their bond another casualty of the murders. The legal aftermath lingered. The Borden case exposed flaws in 19th-century justice, circumstantial evidence, class bias, and the limits of forensic science. No other suspects were ever charged, though theories abounded. Some pointed to John Morse, whose timely visit seemed suspicious, but his alibi held. Others speculated about a disgruntled tenant or business rival of Andrew's, yet no evidence placed an outsider in the house. Bridget Sullivan, the maid, was questioned but never seriously suspected. She left Fall River soon after, fading into obscurity. The hatchet in the basement, with its clean blade and broken handle, remained a riddle, never conclusively linked to the crimes. The case file grew cold, but public fascination didn't. Books, articles, and plays kept the Borden name alive, each retelling adding new layers to the myth. Lizzie lived out her days at Maplecroft, a recluse in plain sight. She died in 1927 at 66, from pneumonia, followed by Emma 9 days later. They left no confessions, no diaries to clarify their roles. Their estate was divided among distant relatives and charities, with Maplecroft sold off. The Second Street house became a grim landmark, later a museum, its rooms preserved as a time capsule of horror. The murder's legacy stretched far beyond Fall River. The case inspired a morbid nursery rhyme. Lizzie Borden took an axe, cementing her as a cultural boogeyman. It also sparked debates about gender and justice. Would a man have been acquitted on such thin evidence? Lizzie's trial, a media circus, set a precedent for high-profile cases, from O.J. Simpson to Casey Anthony, where public opinion often outran facts. The aftermath revealed a town and a family fractured. Fall River's elite closed ranks, wary of the scandal's stain. The Borden fortune, once a source of envy, became a curse, tying Lizzie to a place that despised her. Theories about her guilt or innocence multiplied. Was she a repressed daughter driven to madness by her father's control? Did she act to secure her inheritance before Andrew could rewrite his will? Or was she framed, a victim of a town eager to pin the crime on an unconventional woman? The lack of closure fueled endless speculation, with no new evidence to settle the score. The Borden murders remain a mirror, reflecting what we want to see: guilt, innocence, or the unsettling gray in between. The Lizzie Borden case is a wound that never healed, a question mark etched into the annals of true crime. Over a century later, the murders of Andrew and Abby Borden remain unsolved, their brutality undimmed by time. Was Lizzie, the quiet daughter with a steely gaze, truly capable of wielding that axe? Or was she a victim of circumstance, her life upended by a killer who slipped through the cracks? The evidence, circumstantial, contradictory, tantalizing, offers no easy answers. The locked doors, the silent strikes, the burned dress, and the missing weapon weave a tapestry of doubt that still captivates us. Here at the Crime O'Clock, we've walked through the blood-stained rooms, sifted through the clues, and stood in the courtroom where a nation held its breath. But the truth? It's as elusive now as it was in 1892, hidden in the shadows of a house that still whispers of secrets. Consider the case for Lizzie's guilt. She was in the house during both murders, her alibi shaky at best. The barn loft story didn't hold up. Too hot, too dusty, no paracords found. The note she claimed Abby received was a phantom, unsupported by any witness. The burned dress, seen by Alice Russell, remains the most damning clue. Why destroy it if not to hide bloodstains? Her attempt to buy prussic acid days before suggests premeditation, even if poison wasn't used. The motive was clear. Andrew's fortune, potentially slipping to Abby's heirs, was a prize worth killing for. The house's layout, with its locked doors and isolated rooms, gave her the means to strike unseen. The ferocity of the attacks, 19 blows to Abby, 11 to Andrew, speaks of personal rage. A daughter's resentment boiled over. Her calm demeanor, her shifting stories, her lack of grief, all painted her as a woman capable of cold calculation. Yet, the case for her innocence is equally compelling. No blood was found on Lizzie, a near impossible feat given the carnage. The hatchet in the basement, clean despite its broken handle, was never conclusively linked to the murders. Forensic science was primitive, no fingerprints, no blood spatter analysis to pin her down. The prosecution's timeline, while tight, left room for doubt. Could a woman of her slight build deliver such forceful blows? The silence of the attacks suggests a practiced killer, not a first-time murderer. And what of other suspects? Andrew's business enemies, though unproven, could have hired a killer. John Morse's visit, while alibied, was suspiciously timed. Even Bridget, the maid, was in the house, her account conveniently vague. The jury, all men, saw a refined woman, not a monster, and acquitted her in 90 minutes. Was this bias, or a recognition that the evidence was too thin? Theories have multiplied over the decades. Some point to psychological motives. Lizzie, trapped by Victorian constraints, snapping under her father's control. Others suggest a conspiracy, a family secret, perhaps tied to the 1891 break-in, that pushed someone else to kill. Modern analyses, from documentaries to forensic studies, have re-examined the case, but no new evidence has emerged. The Second Street house, now a museum, draws thousands, its rooms frozen in time, inviting visitors to play detective. The nursery rhyme, the books, the films, they all keep Lizzie alive, a figure of fascination and fear. Her story challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about family, wealth, and justice. Did she do it? Or was she a woman wronged, her life defined by a crime she didn't commit? The Borden murders defy resolution, their mystery as potent now as it was then. Every clue, every testimony, leads to more questions than answers. Perhaps that's why we're still drawn to it, because it forces us to face the unknown, to wonder what darkness lies behind closed doors. What do you think really happened? Was Lizzie a killer, her calm a mask for murder? Or was she a scapegoat, caught in a web of circumstance? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the Crime O'Clock, because the next mystery might already be ticking.